All right, so this whole month and last month, we've been talking about quadratic functions, and now we're talking about quadratic equations. So we actually have one final giant piece to bring this all together. That final piece now, we're going to review real quick, is so many equations, so many quadratics, so many things to remember. Well, remember we learned the standard form. We learned kind of the vertex form. We didn't really touch on it too much just because, well, it's a little bit more of a complex formula, but also you'll be using it later in your math career in high school. So, and then the intercept form, which is our factored form. So again, ways to solve quadratic equations, completing the square. It's kind of the most complicated one. Factoring or foiling, it's the most popular. Everybody uses it. There's actually one last one that we didn't discover yet, which is our quadratic formula. It is straightforward, 100% works, 999% of the time. Always works, very straightforward, very easy to use. So we're going to use the zero product property to try to solve this equation. So remember, zero product property, we got to FOIL it out or turn it into our factored form. So let's see, factors of 5 are 1 and 5. So we have factors of 1 and 5, which are only two options of factored of 5. Well, I need, if I'm going to add them together, I need to get to 7. 5 plus 1 is not going to get me to 7. That's a 6. How the heck am I supposed to solve this? It's highly impossible. Well, that's where everything starts coming together. We can't do it. Or can we? 110% we can solve this. We can with one simple equation. And that equation or formula is considered the quadratic formula. So this is negative b plus or minus. We've seen that before. We've seen it throughout the last couple of days. The square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, meaning divided by 2a. Using this quadratic formula is actually going to help us solve any quadratic function. So don't throw out turning standard form into factored form and vice versa. If you can't FOIL it out or find any factors, this equation is beautiful. You can solve it anytime. So we can actually solve our question, which what we're going to do now is solve it. So let's get to it. Woo! All right. And remember, this equation will get easier to remember. You can use the song Pop Goes the Weasel. So how this one goes is negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And that's going to be kind of the song-esque that that we learned when we were taking this. It's not the only way to learn it or the only song, but it definitely helps. So remember, our standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. So all of these parts right here, the numbers in front of each of these are going to be our a, b, and c. So in this case, right here is our a. Oh, there's no number. Well, there is. It's an invisible 1. Remember, mathematicians are super lazy. They don't like to write numbers. Our b is going to be a positive 7. The sign in front of it tells you if it's negative or positive. And our c is going to be negative 5. Make sure you include the negative with it. Take it with it. So now we're going to plug in all the parts. So now I have a negative b. This negative b will always stay negative. So I'm going to put my b here. Plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4a. Let me find the color. C all over 2a. Perfect. So now my biggest suggestion to you and biggest advice is always deal with what's inside of the square root. When you can figure out what's going on in the square root, you can find anything that's going on. So this -7 here is going to stay, or sorry, this 7 and this negative is going to stay -7, so that's already done. This 2 times 1 is just a 2, so I can instantly get ready and combine those. Well, 7 squared. 7 squared, or 7 times 7 is 49. I'm going to subtract it from 4 multiplied by 1, which is -4. And I'm going to now multiply -4 and a -5. So essentially what I have right now is this right here. So a negative times a negative is going to give me a positive, and 5 times 4 is 20. So I have a positive 20. Now what I can do is combine my 49 and my 20 that is inside of my square root. Well, 49 plus 20 is 69. So I have -7 plus or minus the square root of 69 over 2. Well, this actually cannot, well, actually, I lied. Let's check it out and see if 69 is a perfect square. Nope. And remember, if we don't have a perfect square, mathematicians like to be precise. So we're going to leave our answer as is. And it is totally fine if I have a square root. We can't figure out what the square root of 69 is. Well, we can with the calculator. But that means you have to write out all of these numbers. You can't round, because this is exactly what the square root of 69 is. So mathematicians, unless it's a nice even number like the square root of 25, like to leave it improper, essentially. So let's try one more last problem here. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of practice to get used to it, and don't worry, we'll have some more practice tomorrow. I always like to write out my equation. So -b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then I like to label what my a, b, and c is. So this again is a 1. That's nice. My b this time is a positive 16. Woo! And my c is a positive 39. It's pretty large, but that's totally fine. So now I'm going to plug in the information. I have a negative. I have a -b, which is 16. -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Now, the biggest thing to remember is this a, this -4, this a, and this c are all multiplied together. They're all next to each other, so you need to make sure you multiply them. So -1 essentially times 16 is going to give me -16 plus or minus, 16 squared. Let's see what that is. 16 squared, 16 times 16 is going to give me 256. That's nice. And since I know a -4 times 1 is -4, I'm actually going to do a double step. So I'm going to take 39 and multiply it by 4. And I should get -156, because a negative times a positive is a negative. Perfect. And 2 times 1, everybody knows that is 2. So now I'm going to subtract 256 from 156 inside of the square root. So that is actually going to give me 100. And I actually know that 100 is a perfect square. I know that 10 times 10 is 100. So I essentially have -16 plus or minus a 10 over 2. So now I can actually find out what my two answers are, unlike the other times. I actually have a nice, beautiful number of 10 and 6, -6 and 2. So how I'm going to break these up is I'm going to have -6 plus 10, just like what we had the other day, over 2. And I'm also going to have a negative 6 minus 10 divided by 2. So what I have here is 10 minus 6 is going to give me 4 divided by 2. So I have 2 as one of my answers. For my second problem here, negative 6 minus a 10 is going to get me more negatives. Remember, keep, change, change. So I have negative 16 divided by 2. Sorry. And I know a negative divided by a positive is a negative, and I should get negative 8. So that is where my parabola will hit the x-axis. It'll hit at positive 2, and it'll hit at negative 8. And it'll be concave up based on the other vocabulary words that I know from our previous unit. This A tells me if it's going to concave up or down. So, whoops. Your checkpoint, now you have a second checkpoint, is quadratic formula. It's 2 questions similar to these. You're just going to use the quadratic formula to solve.